We're back with Open Innovation Week. Thanks to everyone who is watching us live. Remember, you can write your questions to our panelists in the YouTube chat during the presentation so they can answer them at the end of the presentation, okay? Now, to present a panorama of open innovation and startups in Brazil, I invite Bruno Rondani, CEO of 100 Open Startups. Thank you very much, Bruno.
Thank you, Marco. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for Jetro for this partnership and all the content for us to learn more about Japan. From my side, I'll make a brief overview about how open innovation and startups are evolving in the country. And then hopefully we'll find better ways to collaborate between Brazil and Japan. So I'm just sharing my screen. Is it on? Okay. So I like always to start by saying that we are going through a very important transformation on the innovation ecosystem in general. Large companies would work in a very different way towards the ecosystem maybe 20 years ago. And the same goes for startups, the way they see large corporations. So traditionally, large corporations will focus on their internal R&D activities. They still do, but they do it in a very open way now. And the venture capital, they would maybe even profit from the existence of this corporate R&D activities and exploit financially exploit teams in a way that they could compete with those high budgets on R&D by making more nimble startups, but still with the same potential of becoming very big companies. But then something has changed, and mainly the access to capital, to technology, to platforms that made an environment that you have a much larger number of startups in the ecosystem, and then you cannot think innovation without partnering with the ecosystem. And the ecosystem became maybe the main resource for you to be innovative, for you to be capable of competing in an innovation scene. So large companies, they started to more and more, they started to focus on strategies where they could become platform for the ecosystem, and the digital transformation, if you see, it's happening all the sectors. So the digitalization of business means also a lot of opportunities for those large companies to work with startups and a more specific innovation that you can add up and build a system. And then venture capital house also evolved in a way that you have funding in early stage for a larger number of startups. So now you have a bigger population of entrepreneurs working on those different sectors, different technologies that can support and work together with the large companies. And if you see what's happening in the last few years, the number of successful startups that become the so-called unicorn has increased a lot in the last maybe 5, maybe 10 years ago. And now what's happening is that almost all established companies are developing their own ecosystem, trying to manage their relation with the ecosystem and mainly with startups. So you can see not only tech-based or this big technology platforms working on the ecosystem with startup, but you can see more traditional firms also partnering with startups in a massive way, with more and more startups linked to their business. So it became for us very important then to analyze what was happening and help and support. How could a company, now that you compete, if you go to the market, you compete with other companies to the attention and to attract startups. Also, how can you decide the best one? How to team up with them? How to select the best one? So we see the opportunities and the markets as a way to attract this army of entrepreneurs, of startups that will work together in solving big issue, big problems with those that own the resources for that. And then the large firms are mainly those platforms that could support a big number of startups in working together and solving big problems. So first, I'd like to share the results, and then a little bit of how it evolved in Brazil. Talk a little bit about maybe Latin America, but how it evolved in a region that is not as well known as a leading innovation country. But somehow, open innovation with startups in Brazil is doing very well and is producing a lot of attention and results and very interesting innovation cases from in different sectors. So a quick panorama from the last 5 years. If you see first the venture capital, now we are a very attractive region. So maybe we have now hundreds of international venture capital investors operating in the region. We grew maybe 10 years ago from less than $100 million VC investment in the region to maybe 2020 we will be probably above $5 billion. And Brazil takes about half, a little bit more than half of it. So it's a very important growth, meaning that now we have a strong VC industry in the region and in Brazil. And it started to produce also in a constant way this unicorns that the world is also producing, but now the region, Brazil became last year country number 5 in producing, together with Germany, behind the US and China, the country that would produce more unicorns in the year. So we count now with maybe 10 to 15, depending on how you consider the unicorn. But the region has about 25, maybe 30 unicorns by now. And now if we go to the other side and we see what's happening with large companies, we've built this program, I'll explain a little bit more, called 100 Open Innovation, 100 Open Startups, to foster open innovation with startups. And we set up there a platform for companies to use to connect with startups. And this is some interesting numbers. In 2016, we had 27 companies with 40 challenges being published to the startup community. And if we consider all that happened in the 5 years, the very big growth number of companies that will launch challenges, and I'm talking not all the companies in the country will launch together with 100 Open Startups, so you still have more than that, and I will show you a general overview. But only by seeing our platform, you can see a very important growth. And we had in 2020 877 challenges from 167 companies. If we take more general numbers, the community, the open innovation community that was formed in Brazil and is linked via the 100 Open Startup platform, we have about 7,000 people engaged. We have almost 3,000 enterprises, corporations, and then if we count the number of large companies that have at least one open innovation deal with the startup, we have almost 2,000 enterprises. And then if we take the startup side here of let's say the 15 or 16 or 17,000 startups that might exist in the country, we have 13.6 thousand startups that join the program to connect with large corporations, and more than 2,000 of them have signed at least one agreement with one corporation, and this agreement to be considered an open innovation agreement. So if go back to this image of where are the opportunities that we will attract and the platform that we will attract the startups, we can now, by doing that, see how it is distributed, the open innovation agreements, where you have at least one company and one startup to have this open innovation agreement, and it's very well distributed in the different sectors, and you have maybe more transversal sectors like or areas like productivity or marketing or human resource. You have from 9 to 8%, and then if you go to agriculture, healthcare, very important sectors, they're present with about 2% of the total number of agreements. So it's very well distributed by field, by areas, and by industry sectors. So basically, by doing that, you can see the performance of the startups and how they evolve when they are evaluated by the different levels that we supported the startups, ecosystem, investors, corporations, and then open innovation programs, and then the ones that are with agreements, with formal agreements. And then you can see how the startups are evaluated and how they grow and how they raise more funds, get more clients, and then you can converge the attention for the startups that will most probably succeed in the short term. And we started to see phenomenon where the unicorns, or the big companies, but mainly the unicorns, they also grow by partnering with startups. So we have a number of deals made by even a startup from the program called Banco Neon. So they were ranked with a revenue of less than $2.5 million in 2016. And then they bought another startup from the program called May Fácil after having received a very big investment check from Banco Votorantim, and I believe was General Atlantic as well as the VC investor. And then the same happened with Vitex and iFood, Zenvia, ClearSale, Loft. Vitex, for instance, is a SoftBank invested company. They also came to the ranking and bought early stage startups. So this led us to some important insights about what's going on. So we can see that companies are increasingly relying on startups to innovate. The intensity of this relationship, open innovation with startups, has increased maybe 20 to 30 times in the last 5 years, depending on the metric that you take. If you see number of startups with more with deals, how it increased, number of companies. I'm sorry for the Portuguese here in this figures I will show, but here's the number of startups, number of companies, the number of relation or formal contracts or agreements, and the intensity measured by our ranking system. Then we also have this very important insight where we know by now that in the innovation ecosystem, if you take the different type of participants today, executives from large corporations are the main group. So we have more executives interacting in the innovation ecosystem than entrepreneurs themselves. So they surpassed the number of entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs, they were already connected because of all this the venture capital activity and all the programs to foster entrepreneurship, but they were not connected to the large corporations maybe 5 to 10 years ago. And now, if you join innovation ecosystem, you see the presence of this group as the largest group in the innovation ecosystem by now. A very important insight as well is that now in Brazil, companies that look for partnering with startups, they usually find. So at the beginning, we'll have the first 3 years, 2016, 17, and 18, maybe 24-25% of the companies that will look for a startup will find at least one to cooperate with. And now, if a company joins the open innovation ecosystem, they will find in at least more than 50% of the time. So now it's almost reaching 60%. And that means the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem is mature, and they have very good startups to connect with. So and this also leads to another insight that we get from analyzing the numbers, is that last year, or I mean this year, 2020, the number of large corporations surpassed the number of startups with open innovation deals. At the beginning, large companies will come and they will select startups, and we were impressed by how near the number of startups and large companies were. So every time you had a deal, one startup with one company, then we add to our statistics. In the first year, we had like 108 startups and 82 companies, and then 154 startups and a very similar number of companies. But last year, there was a change, and the number of companies became much higher than the number of startups, and that is probably explained by the coordination of the ecosystem. Now, if a company comes at the beginning, they were let's say less in number. Now all the medium-sized company, all the value chain are coming to the startup ecosystem to look for partners, and then they already find the ecosystem very well organized, and it's converging to a fewer number of startups, this first agreement, this first contracts. So that's what's happening, and we believe this will increase a lot. The number of startups will increase, will continue to increase, the number of agreements, and the intensity in the large companies. Because if we see our fifth insight here, open innovation with startups is already a multi-sectoral phenomenon. It's happening in all different fields. I'm sorry again for the graph was made in Portuguese, but we see there financial services, energy, professional services, IT, retail, and let's say food,